The first time I noticed the truck, I told myself I was imagining things. I drive for a regional medical supply company in western Pennsylvania, delivering equipment to clinics and nursing homes. My route changes every day depending on orders, so it's almost impossible for anyone to predict where I'll be unless they work for my company. That Tuesday started like every other shift. I loaded oxygen concentrators, walkers, and sealed boxes of supplies into the back of my delivery van, grabbed a coffee from a Sheetz outside Pittsburgh, and headed toward my first stop. About 20 minutes later, I pulled into a small rehabilitation clinic. As I backed into the loading area, I noticed an older, dark blue Ford F-150 parked across the street. It wasn't unusual. Plenty of people parked there. But when I left 15 minutes later, the truck pulled away almost at the exact same time. I didn't think much of it.
My second delivery was nearly 40 miles away in a completely different town. The truck was already there. It was parked across from the entrance of the nursing home, facing my van. The driver stayed inside, windows up, engine running. I assumed maybe he'd arrived before me and happened to be waiting for someone. Coincidences happen. I unloaded my equipment, got signatures, climbed back into my van, and drove off. A few seconds later, I saw the truck merge onto the road in my mirrors. Drivers notice patterns. You spend enough hours behind the wheel and your brain automatically starts tracking the same vehicles. The truck stayed behind me through several intersections before eventually turning off. I forgot about it. Until lunch. I stopped at a small diner along Route 30 that I visit maybe once every month. When I pulled into the parking lot, the truck was already there. This time I looked directly at it. The windshield reflected too much sunlight to see inside, but I could make out someone sitting behind the wheel. Not eating, not looking at a phone, just sitting, watching the parking lot. I suddenly didn't feel hungry. I drove away. The next stop was added to my route that morning by dispatch. Nobody outside the office should have known I was going there. It was a private residence where we were delivering a hospital bed. When I turned onto the neighborhood street, the truck was parked halfway down the block. Same truck, same faded paint, same dent above the rear wheel, same tinted windows. This time, I felt something tighten in my stomach. I parked anyway. The homeowner met me outside, and together we carried the bed inside. It took almost 30 minutes. When I came back out, the truck hadn't moved. The driver was still inside, facing my van. I got back into the driver's seat and locked the doors before starting the engine. The truck didn't move. I pulled away slowly. It waited. Only after I'd reached the end of the street did it begin following again. Not aggressively, never speeding, never tailgating, just always there. Far enough away that I couldn't accuse anyone of following me. Close enough that I couldn't ignore it. I called my dispatcher. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Kind of a weird question. Has anyone called asking about my route today?" "No." "Anyone know where I'm headed next?" "No. Why?" "I think somebody keeps showing up wherever I go." She laughed. "Maybe you've got a fan." I laughed too, but it sounded fake. Around 3 in the afternoon, I decided to test my theory. Instead of driving toward my next scheduled stop, I turned into a Walmart parking lot. I stayed inside the van. 2 minutes later, the truck entered through the opposite entrance. It drove slowly between rows until it found a spot with a clear view of me. Then, it parked. It didn't matter that I wasn't making a delivery. It had followed me anyway. That was enough. I called 911. The dispatcher asked if the truck had threatened me. No. Displayed a weapon? No. Made contact? No. She apologized and said an officer could meet me if I felt unsafe. But unless the driver actually committed a crime, there wasn't much they could do. She suggested driving to the nearest police station. So I did. The truck followed. The moment I turned into the police station parking lot, the truck kept going. Didn't slow down, didn't stop. It disappeared around the corner. An officer came outside after hearing why I was there. He took down the license plate number I'd written earlier. He looked it up, then frowned. The plate belongs to a silver Honda Civic. What? Not this truck. So it's fake? Looks that way.
He asked if I'd seen the driver. I admitted I hadn't. The windows were too dark. He suggested I finish my route, but call immediately if the truck returned. Easy for him to say. I still had 3 deliveries left.
For the next hour, nothing. No truck. I finally convinced myself it was over. My last stop was a small assisted living facility outside Greensburg. By then it was getting dark. I parked behind the building where employees directed deliveries. The loading area was empty, quiet. Trees surrounded the back lot. I unloaded the last oxygen concentrator and wheeled it inside. The nurse signed my paperwork. I chatted with her for less than 5 minutes. When I came back outside, my driver's door was open.
I knew I'd locked it. At first, I thought maybe I'd simply forgotten. Then, I noticed the glove compartment hanging open. Nothing looked stolen. My wallet was still there, my company tablet, my paperwork, everything. Except someone had placed a folded piece of paper on the driver's seat. There was no message, just a printed map. A map of tomorrow's delivery route. Not today's, tomorrow's. Every scheduled stop had been highlighted in yellow. I hadn't even received that route until after lunch. I ran back inside and called 911 again. This time, officers arrived within minutes. They searched the parking lot. Nothing. The truck was gone. They dusted the van for fingerprints, mostly mine. One partial print they couldn't identify. The detective asked who else had access to tomorrow's route. Dispatch, managers, a few office employees. Nobody else. At least, that's what everyone believed. The company's internal investigation lasted weeks. Eventually, they discovered someone had remotely logged into our dispatch software using an employee account after business hours. The login came from a public library nearly 60 miles away. Security cameras showed a man wearing a baseball cap and surgical mask. He stayed exactly 9 minutes, downloaded multiple delivery schedules, then left. The image wasn't clear enough for identification. The account owner had no idea their password had been stolen months earlier through a phishing email. The police believed whoever followed me had been watching drivers for weeks, choosing routes, learning habits, and figuring out which deliveries were isolated enough to approach. No one ever found out why. I quit that job 3 months later. Not because of the truck, because I couldn't stop checking my mirrors. Even now, years later, every time I see an older blue F-150 behind me for more than a few turns, my heart starts racing. A detective called me almost a year after everything happened. They had finally located the truck, abandoned inside an old warehouse. The fake plates were gone. Most of the interior had been stripped. There was almost nothing inside. Almost. Under the passenger seat, they found a plastic folder. Inside were printed delivery schedules. Mine, along with schedules belonging to 4 other drivers from different companies. 3 names had been crossed out with a black marker. Mine wasn't one of them. The first time she spoke to me, she already knew my dog's name. I'd never seen her before. I hadn't introduced myself. I hadn't even taken my dog's collar off after getting out of the car. Yet as I walked past her, she smiled and said, "Morning. Baxter looks excited today." I stopped walking because Baxter wasn't wearing a name tag. This happened 2 years ago, after I moved to a suburb outside Raleigh, North Carolina. I worked remotely as a software developer, so my routine rarely changed. Every morning around 7, I'd drive 10 minutes to a fenced dog park before starting work. It wasn't a huge place. Most regulars recognized each other, even if we didn't know everyone's names. That's why I assumed the woman had simply overheard someone else say Baxter's name on another morning. She looked to be in her late 40s, always dressed for jogging, though I never actually saw her run. She didn't have a dog. That struck me as odd, but I figured maybe she was waiting for someone. Over the next week, I saw her almost every morning, always sitting on the same bench, always alone. She'd smile
nod and make small comments. Running late today? Looks like Baxter's feeling better. Skipping the West Trail? The last one caught me off guard. I had planned to walk the wooded trail behind the park. I hadn't told anyone. When I asked what she meant, she just shrugged. I guessed. Maybe she had, but it didn't feel like a guess. A few days later, I stopped going to the park altogether. Instead, I started walking Baxter in a neighborhood 20 minutes away. The very next morning, she was there, standing beside the sidewalk. No dog, no phone, just watching the trail. She smiled when she saw me. I was wondering where you'd gone. I didn't answer. I turned around immediately and left. That afternoon, I checked my social media. Everything was private. No location sharing, no public posts. I searched through old photos anyway. Then, I noticed something. In the background of a picture I'd posted months earlier, a woman was sitting on a park bench. Same hair, same running jacket, same face. The photo had been taken in a completely different city, before I'd even moved. At first, I convinced myself it couldn't be her. Then I found another picture. Different month, different location. There she was again, half hidden behind a tree, looking toward the camera, or maybe looking at me. I went to the police. The officer listened patiently, but explained there wasn't much they could investigate. The woman hadn't threatened me, hadn't touched me, hadn't entered my property. He suggested documenting every encounter, so I bought a dash camera and a Ring doorbell. 3 quiet days passed. Then the notifications started. Not during the day. Around 3 every morning. Motion detected. Each clip lasted only a few seconds. By the time I opened the app, the person had already walked away. The footage was too dark to identify anyone clearly. Until the 4th night. The porch light caught her face for less than a second. It was the woman from the park. She wasn't trying to hide. She looked directly into the camera and smiled. The next morning, I stayed home from work. I parked my car inside the garage and kept every curtain closed. Nothing happened. Around noon, Baxter suddenly ran to the front window and started barking. A delivery van had stopped outside. The driver walked to my porch, placed a package down, and drove away. When I opened the door, there was no shipping label, no return address. Inside the box was a brand new tennis ball, Baxter's favorite kind. Underneath it was a handwritten note. He always chooses the blue one first. That was true. I'd never told anyone. The police took the package and dusted it for fingerprints. Nothing useful. Over the next month, patrol cars drove through the neighborhood more often. The woman never appeared again. Eventually, I moved to another apartment across town. I changed my routines completely. Different grocery stores, different walking routes, different parks, different gym. I never saw her again. At least, not in person. Almost a year later, I received an email from the detective who had taken my report. They had finally identified the woman. She'd been questioned in connection with several stalking complaints over the previous decade. None of the cases had enough evidence for charges. Attached to the email was a photograph recovered from a storage unit she had rented. It showed dozens of folders spread across a table. Each folder had someone's first name written on the front. Mine was one of them. The detective told me they never found out why she chose those people. But one detail has stayed with me ever since. My folder wasn't the thickest one. It wasn't the newest one. It wasn't even the oldest. It was simply the only folder that had been closed. The others were still open. I started noticing the account because it was always first. No matter what time I posted an Instagram story, 7 a.m., 2 p.m., or nearly midnight, the same private account viewed it within seconds. It had no profile picture, no posts, no followers, no following. Just a random username made up of letters and numbers. At first, I assumed it was some kind of bot.
Then it started appearing in places where a bot couldn't.
I was 26 and living alone in a suburb outside Denver, Colorado. I worked as a freelance photographer, so I posted stories constantly. Coffee shops, client shoots, hiking trails, anything that looked interesting. My account was public because most of my clients found me through Instagram. I never thought much about who viewed my stories until I realized the same account was always first. Not almost always. Always. One afternoon, I uploaded a story from a small bookstore I'd never visited before. Within 5 seconds, the account had already viewed it. That seemed impossible. The location wasn't tagged. I hadn't posted anything beforehand. No one knew I was there. I checked again an hour later. The account was still first on the viewer list. Curious, I ran a small experiment. The next morning, instead of posting immediately, I drove to a quiet park on the other side of town. I waited 20 minutes. Then, I uploaded a single photo of a bench. 4 seconds later, viewed. Same account. That night, I blocked it. The next morning, another private account appeared. Different username, same behavior. Always first. A week later, I stopped posting altogether. 3 quiet days passed. Then I received a direct message from an account I'd never seen before. It contained only one sentence. You stopped sharing. No greeting, no explanation. I blocked it immediately. An hour later, another account sent a photo. It was my apartment building, taken from across the street. I called the police, but there wasn't much they could do with anonymous online accounts. That evening, I closed every blind and unplugged my Ring camera to reset it after it started acting strangely. Before going to bed, I looked out through a small gap in the curtains. A man was standing on the sidewalk across the street. He wasn't looking at my apartment. He was looking down at his phone. A second later, my Instagram account received another follow request. I deleted every social media account I had, changed my phone number, moved 6 months later. Nothing happened after that. Eventually, I convinced myself it was over, until a detective contacted me about an unrelated fraud investigation. During a search of a suspect's apartment, officers had found dozens of external hard drives containing folders labeled with people's names. Mine was one of them. The detective told me there were thousands of screenshots inside my folder. Not just my posts, my stories. Almost every single one I'd uploaded over nearly 2 years. Each image had a timestamp showing exactly how many seconds passed before it was viewed. The shortest delay was 3 seconds. The detective couldn't explain how someone managed to see them that quickly every single time. But one detail unsettled me more than anything else. The screenshots continued for almost 3 weeks after I'd stopped posting.